Hello, everyone. Today I'd like to talk about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and really specifically rock and roll music. Okay, I'm not going to talk about this particular album. It's the only thing I have that shows rock and roll on it. Although I may talk a little bit about it or allude to it a little later. But so, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and rock and roll music. Okay, the reason why I want to talk about this topic, it's been a topic in my mind for quite a bit, and I've never really got a chance to talk about it, or at least give my opinions and maybe do a little research into it. But it was my buddy Norm Cowie's most recent YouTube video. I think it was titled, what was it? Like an older guy watching a rap song or listening to rap music for the first time, something like that. You can visit him. His channel is at a funny paraplegic, or you can look him up at normcowie.com. Anyway, his video, he talks about listening to rap music, trying to understand it, among other things. And near the end of his video is where he brought up kind of like a little rant on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, why they're putting in like country music and Bonnie Raitt or something like that, and not artists like I think we said CSN, Jethro Tull, Three Dog Night, well, yes, Styx, something like that. I think CSN is actually in it, if I'm not mistaken, but the others may not be in it. Three Dog Night probably mainly because they're. I had another video talking of them as being the best cover band of all time, and maybe that is one of the main reasons why, or the main reason why, is that they didn't write their own music, or the hits that they've done is not their music. So, but anyway, that's for another discussion. And he goes on, talks about like why they have like hip hop in there, country in there, when it's not really, rock and roll music, and artists like those that should be in there. I think the artists he mentioned eventually will be in there. Styx, Three Dog Night should be in there. I agree. Jethro Tull, yes. And I'll come back and like circle around to them a little later, but I think eventually they'll get in there. But I think, and it's not just my buddy Norm, but I hear it a lot of why the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has all these non rock music groups in them. And I like to get down to that and try to understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and really the term rock or rock and roll music, okay? So I think the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, what was it, started in the mid 80s or late 80s, or the first inductees. And you could tell right off the bat, the first few years, I mean, you got the traditional artists, the really heavy hitters like Elvis, you got all the blues artists in there, and rightfully so. And then you start to notice someone like the Supremes, which right off the bat, you can kind of tell that it's not going to be your typical rock, the term rock band or rock artist, okay? To me, the Supremes are more like an oldies, soft music, light music. They're not your genre type of rock band, and that's where I want to get into. So, when I rock as a kid, I always kind of get the term rock and roll is the same, but as going into different types of music growing up, and then just listening to all kinds of music, all kinds of genres from all, mainly in English, but try to get into other like outside the US, outside the UK type of music. And I've come to realize like really rock to me is kind of a subgenre of rock and roll. Okay. Now, I'm not those who know me, I'm not a technical person in terms of music. I don't play an instrument, know anything, can't read music notes or anything like that. All I do is just listen to music. That's all I do. But, I looked up the definition of what rock is, or really rock and roll. Sorry, it's rock and roll music, the definition. And you're going to get a bunch of answers, obviously. If you ask like 100 people, give your definition of rock and roll. What is rock and roll? Okay. You're going to get basically 100 different answers. Okay. But there is some patterns or there's a common denominator to these definitions of what people think. And I've listed 4 of them, and it's described by a couple people that did a pretty good job on this. So with rock and roll music, you can pretty much break it down to 4 parts, okay? The first one, and I wrote it down, is tempo, okay? Now, tempo it's usually between, for rock and roll music, it's usually between 80 to 140 BPMs, or beats per minute. Now, I do know music is usually, popular music that we all know and listen to on a radio station or whatever is top 100, Billboard, whatnot. The majority of music all falls into this. Okay, so I guess maybe not classical music. That's what classical music might be, very slow tempoed or something. I don't know, but that's probably the only thing I can think of that kind of falls out of this thing. But who knows? Maybe classical is 80 beats per minute. I don't know what it is. But first thing is tempo, okay? The second thing, and to me is the most important, and this is where there's so many different opinions about it, is the instrumentation, okay? So rock and roll music would always have, like, you got the drum kit, right? So the snares, the drum, all kinds, the parts of the drumming itself, the kit, the entire kit. And that always goes along with the bass guitar or the bass playing, right? And those two combined is usually the rhythm section, right? And that's basically the backbone of rock music and rock and roll music, and that's what we know today. Okay, so that's pretty much the standard for that, right? And then you would also have a vocalist, like someone singing. Someone has to be singing, whether it's you got a lead singer or multiple singers and they take turns, and so forth. So you would have like a lead or multiple lead vocalists. So you would have that. And then you would also have, like, most people put for rock and roll a guitar, like a lead guitar, rhythm guitar, or some combination of the two, okay? Now, there's rock and roll music that is like, piano, like it's piano based. That's the fronting instrument. I think Elton John, Billy Joel, that kind. You would consider them rock and roll music artists or rock and roll, musical artists, but they're not guitarists per se. There might be some guitars like rhythm guitar and things like that. Definitely a bass guitar. But the fronting instrument is not like an electric guitar, or stuff like that. So, so that's instrumentation. Okay. Now most people think of, and I'm pretty sure Norm, my bud Norm, would too, think of, when he thinks of rock and roll music, it's guitar playing, like nonstop, that type of stuff. Lead guitar, multiple lead guitars, going back and forth, things like that. You get guitar riffs. You got guitar like solos and stuff like that. When you think of traditionally, think of rock and roll music, and I'm gonna say more rock music. I'll get to the separation a little later, but again, it doesn't have to be for rock and roll. Again, there's artists that are piano based and that can do it, right? And we consider that rock and roll music. And the third criteria for defining rock and roll music is rhythm. Okay, it has to have a backbeat, and it's usually 4 on 4, 4 by 4. Obviously, that can be all different, but it's usually that type of thing. So, and that you'll pretty much all rock and roll music will have that type of backbeat. Okay. And the fourth is, I mentioned vocalist. The fourth option is the fourth criteria for this is lyrics, right? There's always, because there's a vocalist, there's singing, there's lyrics involved, right? So, if there's no singing, we usually put that in a different like genre, like either jazz or instrumental music or something like that, and we technically don't bundle that into rock and roll music. Period. It's just there's got to be some singing, right, involved. So that's the four main criteria I believe that define rock and roll music as we know it, and I'm pretty sure most people can agree with the majority of this criteria. And we all do know that rock and roll music really started from, it really is like black music, right? So you got the rhythm and blues, really blues, right? Blues, like Chicago blues, Delta blues, mixed with some folk, some, I would even say country, kind of like all together, right? But it's really black music, and that's how kind of rock and roll was formed, right? And when you hear the early artists, especially those that got inducted into the Hall of Fame, there are a lot of these blues artists and artists that that probably you've never heard of, but they've influenced the style of what we know of modern rock and roll music today. So now, rock music. Okay, what I described earlier was rock and roll music. If I just said rock music, I meant rock and roll, because I'm gonna actually tell my opinion that they should be distinct. So to me, that's what rock and roll music is. Rock music to me is just like a subgenre of rock and roll music. And I got a definition here. Like, rock music, a lot of people, again, use it interchangeably, like, banana, or whatever, tomato, whatever. But really, there is a difference. Most people would say, or who are knowledgeable in the definition, would tend to agree and put this as rock and roll music or rock music. Let's start with rock music. Rock music is what we know and what people generally categorize as it's hard and it's upbeat. It's hard and upbeat music, okay? That's rock music. Rock and roll is like that as well, but it also has the roll part of it. The rock and the roll, the rolling down beat of it, okay? And that rolling down beat, from what I understand, makes it more danceable. Okay, so rock and roll is music that, in the 50s or late 40s, that once it got really popular, it's because, it's you could dance to it. Now, what type of dancing? That's, whatever. It can be any type of dancing. It doesn't have to be, a certain type of dance, right? But you can dance to it, right? So when I think of these two, that's how I separate the two. Okay, so rock and roll music to me is the umbrella of the music of rock. So rock, it has the hard and the upbeat type stuff in rock and roll music, but it also has the danceable part. And when I mean danceable, think of it this way. When I think of rock music, like especially like the hard rock, that kind of stuff, to me, you don't really dance. Now, I could be wrong. You could, if you consider jumping around stuff dancing, that's fine. But to me, it's more like head bopping and like doing the air guitaring and just doing it throughout the song. To me, that's more of the rock. You can't really dance to it, but again, nothing wrong. It's just, to me, it's that genre of style of music that you just really, head bop and, kind of try to play along with air air drumming, air guitar, whatever. But rock and roll, you can dance to it, okay? And that's the whole point. There's a someone quoted this. I don't know if it's from a movie or something. And again, I don't know the technical terms. I don't understand the reasoning behind it, but here's the thing. Like with rock and roll, Chuck Berry, everyone kind of considers, one of the front founders of rock and roll music, Chuck Berry. Really, when people say Chuck Berry, they say Chuck Berry was the rock, right? Now, Johnny Johnson, who was the pianist, I think, for Chuck Berry, he's the roll part. So Chuck Berry was the rock, and Johnny Johnson was the roll part. Okay? And then if you want to go to Little Richard, kind of same era, Little Richard was the rock, and then his drummer, Earl Palmer, okay, he was the roll part, okay? Now, again, I don't know from a music technicality what that means, but from knowing Chuck Berry and Little Richard's music and knowing the other two, Johnny Johnson and Earl Palmer, what they're doing to the music from their instruments, I can understand from a listening standpoint, or think I understand from a listening standpoint of what they're doing. So, and believe it or not, I think all four of these artists I mentioned are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I think Johnny Johnson and Earl Palmer as sidemen, but inducted into the Hall of Fame. So, what I'm getting at is this: if going off these definitions of what rock and roll is, and separating the term rock from rock and roll, and rock being a subgenre of rock and roll, what I'm getting at is what the Hall of Fame is doing. I think they're doing okay in terms of the selection process, who they're inducting into the Hall of Fame. Okay, obviously, the criteria you got, whoever's being inducted needs to be influential one way or another. Whether the artist has a lot of hits, non-stop hits, or fantastic influential albums, or there's also the writers, right, that write the music. I think Stoller and Liebler were one of the first inductees. They're the writers for a lot of the blues and stuff, artists like that, or blues influence. They were inducted. We're talking about producers that were inducted. Even like the sidemen that got inducted into the Hall of Fame as just pure instrumentalists. So there's got to be, first of all, in order to get in, you got to be influential some way or another. But now, knowing if you believe or agree to what I describe as rock and roll music essentially is popular music. And technically speaking, it is. It's just popular music that covers practically all genres if you follow the four steps. If you include all the four criteria of the drum kit, rhythm, the instrumentation, the lyrics, it has to be singing, the rhythm, the downbeat, and so forth. And if you and the tempo and so forth, right? And if you just follow those four criteria, the roll part too being the downbeat, the making it danceable part of it, pretty much all music in all genres outside of classical music, jazz, instruments, like there's no singing involved, right? Or that's like music that's super, super slow. You eliminate those and basically everything from any pop music, rock, blues, country, disco, hip hop. I mean, So disco, right? Disco, a lot of people complain like, why is Donna Summer in it? Why is Chic in it? I don't know if Chic's in it. Maybe now Rogers is in it. As opposed to like Yes. I don't know if Yes is in it, but you know, or artists like Styx, like what Norm mentioned, Styx, you know, and so forth. Let's take Jethro Tull. Jethro Tull, he mentioned, should be in it. I agree. I like Jethro Tull. But to me, Jethro Tull, if you listen to his music, right, it's that sit down and just listen type of music, right? You can like listen to Teacher or, you know, Aqualung or whatever from Jethro Tull. And it's more of the, you know, that's a head bop and, you know, maybe air guitar a bit, or maybe do a flute. You know, he does that flute thing. That's the music to me that is more rock than roll, or it's rock, not rock and roll, because it's music I don't really dance to or anything like that, right? It's more of the head bop, like I mentioned before. It's more like that. Whereas Donna Summer, shoot, you dance to that all, all the time. It fits all the four criteria for rock and roll, right? You got the tempo. It's disco music is usually 120 beats per minute, so it falls in that range, right? And again, most music does fall in that range. It's got the rhythm section for sure. It's got the vocalist. There's some guitar playing. It depends on the song. Bad Girls is probably the best example. Highly recommend you listen to it if you don't know Donna Summer. It's got the vocals, the lyrics, and it's got the rhythm, man, and you can dance to it. To me, Donna Summer, Chic, really any disco band, Bee Gees, I think Bee Gees is in. To me, they're more rock and roll worthy than Jethro Tull is rock and roll worthy. Now, I know I'm going to get a lot of hate on that, but again, if you follow the criteria I mentioned of what defines rock and roll, and you understand that the roll part is the part that makes the music more danceable, more accessible from a dancing perspective, Donna Summer would be more rock and roll than Jethro Tull. I mean, it is, because shoot, who doesn't, with Donna Summer, who doesn't go to a club and dance that type of music, you know? So that's why artists like Donna Summer being in it, disco artists, to me, fit the criteria of rock and roll. Heck, Madonna's in it. She totally fits that criteria. Country music, again, country music is rock and roll, rock and roll, more like rock and roll, especially the older country music I like to follow. To me, they're more rock and roll. The only difference, it's just a subgenre of rock and roll, like rock is to rock and roll. It's just that that subgenre has a little more twang, you know, southern twang. Has that, I don't know, that guitar, that guitar you hear that gives it that twang sound. I forgot what it is. I don't know if it's the slide guitar. No, it's not the slide guitar. It's that you know what I'm talking about, right? Usually that's added in there. There's some banjo, maybe banjo playing in there, some violin playing. But, you know, it's still, it fits the criteria of the four criteria of rock and roll. And a lot of country music is danceable. I mean, everyone does that line dance and so forth, you know, things like that. Fits rock and roll, the definition of rock and roll to me. So nothing wrong with Bonnie Raitt. Is Dolly Parton in it? I hope she is. She's one of my favorite country artists. Glenn Campbell, Kenny Rogers, you name it, they should be in it, no doubt about it. Now, the one that really is an outlier, I wouldn't consider an outlier, but most people don't associate, is hip hop, right? So we got a bunch of hip hop artists that are in. Like we got Tribe that's in it. Beastie Boys, I guess. I mean, they're okay. I mean, there's other artists hip hop artists I would put before Beastie Boys, but you know, you got Run DMC. I think, who else was in it? Like recently, like there's a bunch. Kendrick's gonna be in it too someday. So, you know, a lot of people complain why they're in it. Now, let's analyze hip hop, and I did it. I had another video talking about sampling, But essentially, that's what that is, right? Hip hop is based off of samples, and you kind of rap over it. Now, the samples themselves are usually, they fall into the 4 criteria for rock and roll, right? They have they have the lyricism, most definitely. That's probably the most important part of hip hop is the bars, the rapping part of it, right? Got the rhythm. You definitely got the rhythm section, right? You got the bass, the kick, the kick drum, nonstop going through, I don't know how many beats per minute, whatever it is. Sometimes you do have some guitar or some piano or something playing, but it's really the lyricism. So it fits the 4 criteria that defines rock and roll, okay? And the roll part, hip hop music, majority of it is definitely danceable, right? You go to clubs and you dance to it, right? A lot of it is just head bopping. I do admit it depends on the type of hip hop song we're talking about, but you could dance to it. You saw Kendrick dancing. It's like a biggest thing right now in the Super Bowl halftime show. He's like doing that, that type of dance. So, and when you put it all together, it fits the rock and roll music criteria. And because of that, hip hop should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as well. Okay. No questions asked. Again, fitting the criteria and the definitions I described in the beginning, they're in, right? The only person I've seen, there might be a couple others, and I mentioned jazz, but Louis Armstrong was inducted, and early on too. And I can understand why. Yeah, he's jazz, but his form, and a lot of it's blues influence as well. He definitely deserves it. And I think I mentioned in another video, I feel Louis Armstrong is the greatest musical artist of any genre of the 20th century, in my opinion. So, but going back to all the artists that were inducted since the late 80s, late 80s, I pretty much agree. A majority I know. There might be some like the sidemen gig that I may not know. People that are just the side, but they're not the lead artists or anything like that, but are in. I had to look those up, but pretty much everything I can agree with. I have no qualms. They're either producers that are very influential. Like you got Clive Davis is in there. You got Berry Gordy, Motown in there. You got the writing duos or the songwriters in there, so forth. And then the artists and then the sidemen that play the instruments, they're all in there. So I believe so. And there's still more continuing on. I mean, I believe that's the essence of what rock and roll music is and why the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame are inducting the people that are being inducted, their criteria is. And I have nothing against it. Well, whether you prefer to have an artist, a certain artist that's not in there and deserves to be in there, that's another story. But I have nothing against what the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has done. Now I know there's some politics involved as well and things like that, and I don't want to get into that because I don't know what the details are and whatnot. But and there's like preferential treatment to certain artists. Maybe some of the voters like certain artists or certain types of music more than the others, and even though they're within the umbrella of rock and roll music, I'm not going to get into that. I'm just whoever they inducted thus far, to me, again, following the definitions and the criteria that I defined for rock and roll music, they all fit.